Designed as a utility helicopter, the versatile Huey serves with the United States Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. Its incredible legacy propels the Bell Aircraft Company to unprecedented success and revolutionizes the role of the helicopter. I'm Paul Max Moga. Join me as we tell the story of the beloved Huey. During the Vietnam War, the work of the Huey helps add a new element to military strategy, changes the way wars are fought, and becomes an integral tool for military forces around the world. This UH-1H is on display at the Air Mobility Command Museum at Dover Air Force Base. It's an authentic Vietnam War veteran. The U.S. Army used it in combat from 1970 to 1972. Jim Fazekas and Rick Roll are volunteers at the museum and flew the Huey in Vietnam. Jim is a retired Army Chief Warrant Officer 4 and has more than 2,500 hours flying the Huey. Rick flew the Hueys for a year in Vietnam and worked as an instructor at Fort Rucker. He left the Army with the rank of captain after 3 years of service. Rick, Jim, pleasure to meet you guys.
Same here.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks for taking a couple minutes to talk to us about the mighty Huey. I'm a little nervous standing around a couple of Army guys, but we'll get over it, okay? Talk to me about, Rick, the genesis of the Huey. Why was this helicopter developed? I mean, it did some wonderful things throughout its service life, but was there a need that it filled at the given time?
Well, after the Second World War, it was clear that the Army wanted to have an airmobile concept and being able to take their troops into battle in the air rather than on the ground. The Huey was developed. It was the first turbine engine utility helicopter for the U.S. Army. Went into service in the late 50s, early 60s, and absolutely dramatically revolutionized Army aviation.
If one sight and one sound personify the Vietnam War, it's the Bell UH-1 Iroquois helicopter, universally known as the Huey. Built in greater numbers than almost any other aircraft in history. To the more than 2.6 million Americans who served in Vietnam, the Huey conjures a proud symbol for the brave souls whose lives were forever changed by the devastation of war. The Bell Company's Huey emerges from one of aviation's most fascinating innovators, Arthur Young. Born in Paris in 1905, Young attends Princeton and is determined to make a contribution to the field of philosophy, a contribution he feels impossible without success in the field of technology. After a visit to the U.S. Patent Office in 1927, Young focuses on the challenge of the helicopter. For more than a decade, he works alone in a Connecticut barn, continually testing and redesigning small models of his helicopter. In 1941, he demonstrates one of his models to Larry Bell, the founder and president of Bell Aircraft Company. Impressed, Bell hires Young to develop his helicopter. Convinced about the future of helicopters, Bell pays for development without government funds. Within 18 months, Young and other Bell engineers build their first one, the Model 30. It debuts on a cold winter day, a day filled with problems. First, they have to adjust the landing skids to get the aircraft out of the hangar, and then the engine won't start. A less than impressive debut. But Young presses on, and after a few modifications, tests continue. For several months, tethered flights assess the aircraft's mobility and stability, enabling Young to determine if the aircraft has enough power to lift off the ground. Young often tests the aircraft himself, but the first accident happens with another pilot at the helm. He's thrown from his seat and through the rotor. Incredibly, he escapes with only a broken wrist. Bell pilot Floyd Carlson, fresh from testing Bell fighters, quickly learns how to hover the aircraft. In the spring of 1943, under Carlson's control, the Model 30 takes its first free flight. The Model 30 unveils two innovations that identify Bell helicopters: a wide two-blade main rotor hinged at the rotor head, and a stabilizer bar mounted at 90 degrees to the main rotor blades, with streamlined weights at each end. The aircraft is powered by a 165 horsepower Franklin engine with a covered fuselage and an open cockpit. The success of this test flight strengthens Bell's commitment to the helicopter. However, excessive vibrations destroy the prototype during landing tests. Bell's engineers are persistent and continue to modify and improve on Young's design. In 1944, test pilot Floyd Carlson hovers the experimental aircraft in front of a puzzled crowd in Buffalo, New York. The following year, Carlson gives two impromptu demonstrations of the helicopter's potential. In the first, Carlson flies a doctor to a snowed-in farmhouse in western New York to aid an injured pilot. Carlson later rescues two men from a crumbling ice floe on Lake Erie. Both missions demonstrate that helicopters can go where planes and boats cannot. Carlson's Lake Erie rescue earns him the Treasury Department Silver Medal and provides the Bell Company with great publicity for its helicopter development. The first officially designated Model 47 takes to the air on December 8, 1945. Within 3 months, the model receives the FAA's Type Approval Certificate. It's the first ever awarded to a commercial helicopter. Commercial and military contracts pour in, and production of the Model 47 begins in late 1946. This marks the start of a legacy that spans 27 years, 20 models, and more than 5,000 aircraft. After Bell spends $12 million in development, the Model 47 emerges, pushing Bell to the forefront of helicopter design and manufacturing. Determined to integrate the helicopter into the commercial world, Larry Bell sends out teams of employees with Model 47s to demonstrate its capabilities. These new models replace the cabin of the older model with the now familiar goldfish bowl plexiglass bubble. Bell succeeds in gaining commercial acceptance of his aircraft, and world events ensure the military will also learn about the Model 47's talents. Bell's Model 47D, the first helicopter mass-produced for military use, is developed in 1947. Three years later, the Korean War gives the Model 47 a new opportunity to demonstrate its capabilities. But could the Korean winter prove to be too harsh for the helicopter? The initial designation of HU-1A, Helicopter Utility, or Huey, led to its nickname, Huey. In 1947, the first mass-produced military helicopter, the Bell Model 47D, gets its first chance to prove itself during the Korean War. The bitter cold Korean winter takes its toll on the troops and on their vehicles. Because fixed-wing aircraft can't land in many remote areas, the Army integrates helicopters into its logistical strategy. The Model 47 finds its niche as an air ambulance, revolutionizing the evacuation of wounded soldiers. The Model 47 can land virtually anywhere, and with stretchers on each side can carry a medic and 2 wounded soldiers directly to MASH units. More than 2,400 Model 47s serve military forces throughout the world. And in commerce, more than 2,600 Model 47s take flight. The model's success spurs more development. In 1954, Bell engineers designed Model 204 to fit the U.S. Army's need for casualty evacuation, troop transport, and pilot training. The Army specifies easy field maintenance and the ability to lift an 800-pound load over a mission radius of 115 miles. The prototype of Bell's Model 204, the YH-40, wins the U.S. Army design competition in June 1955. It first flies on October 22, 1956, and the military authorizes 6 more pre-service trials and several design adjustments. In August 1958, 6 YH-40s are delivered to the Army for evaluation, each with a cabin about a foot longer than the prototype. In addition, these choppers have 4-inch high landing skids, a wider access door, and a cabin roof-mounted turbine engine that runs on most fuels. It can also fly 1,000 hours before needing a mechanical overhaul. The cabin can accommodate 2 crewmen and 8 troops. The Army puts these aircraft through a battery of brutal tests. In Canada and Alaska, the aircraft endures temperatures down to 65 degrees below zero and is then subjected to extended icing conditions. Other models are tested in the extreme heat and dust of the Arizona desert. The YH-40 meets the challenges. The tests determine if the YH-40 can perform under battle conditions. The Army also tests the helicopter's tactical capabilities for troop transport, medical evacuation, and both internal and external cargo transport. The YH-40 incorporates a single-point, 3,000-pound capacity external cargo suspension system. The system is attached to the aircraft's center of gravity to improve stability while moving external cargo. The YH-40 is able to easily lift an L-19 airplane, weighing just under a ton. The Army is pleased with the Bell helicopters. It designates the helicopter the HU-1A Iroquois, nicknamed the Huey. Even when the military changes the designation for utility helicopters to UH in 1962, the name Huey stays. The Army initially orders 9 HU-1s, featuring a single Lycoming T-53 turboshaft engine. 2 months later, in September 1958, the first HU-1A leaves Bell's Texas plant. Within a year, orders for the Huey exceed 100. Now, I'm looking at a checklist in front of me. Jim, you can't see it, but it says Pilot's Checklist, UH-1H, takeoff, instruments, controls, governor RPM. There had to have been more to it than that. I mean, this one only has 3. Are those like the, you gotta do them or else you're in big trouble?
That was the basic instruments. The thing is with a helicopter, it's all governor controlled. Once you roll the throttle all the way on, the governor controls the turbine. And you don't mess the throttle until you're ready to shut it off.
And also, the military didn't want us to memorize or use checklists because they wanted to be. They didn't want us to use paper checklists. They wanted us to memorize them because they wanted us to jump in the machine, crank it, and take off the shortest amount of time.
The ruggedness and ease of operation proves vital in the Huey's first combat deployment. Before 1960, few Americans experienced the wet terrain and harsh climate of a small coastal country in Southeast Asia. Yet within the next decade, 2.6 million Americans serve in the jungles of Vietnam. More than 60,000 will not come home. The average age of an American soldier is 19, compared to age 26 in World War II. The troops serving in Vietnam are not prepared for guerrilla warfare. The traditional American military equipment also isn't suited for the unpredictable landscapes of Southeast Asia. New technologies and strategies have to be mastered quickly, and the Huey will be at the forefront of these new methods of warfare. UH-1s tasked and configured for troop transport were often called slicks due to an absence of weapons pods. In the 1960s, America is working diligently to design new, better, and more efficient equipment to help fight the battle in Vietnam. America's involvement in Vietnam begins as an advisory role to the South Vietnamese. But as the possibility of North Vietnamese victory increases, full-scale military operations are implemented, and more American supplies and aircraft head to Vietnam. Throughout the war, the U.S. works desperately to slow the infiltration of supplies and soldiers from the North, who are making their way south. Initially, it's believed massive airstrikes in the North would force the North Vietnamese to the negotiating table. But the strikes failed to halt the North Vietnamese supply lines, and gradually American ground troops commit to the campaign. Soon, thousands of American men find themselves out of their element in Southeast Asia. Without roads and bridges, moving trucks, troops, tanks, and other supplies through the jungle terrain becomes a challenge for Pentagon strategists. Through trial and error, they develop new methods of warfare, and at the heart of it lies the helicopter. The first American helicopters to serve in Vietnam are the Piasecki H-21 Shawnee tandem rotor helicopters, dubbed the Flying Bananas. These underpowered and unarmed aircraft suffer serious losses, prompting some American advisors to suggest they fly with an escort. In 1962, the first Hueys arrive in Vietnam and begin escorting the H-21s. In the first 5 months of combat flying, only one Huey gunship is shot down, and the loss of H-21s drops 25%. These early successes endear the Hueys to pilots and ground troops alike. Now let's talk about kind of the skin of the Huey. This doesn't seem to me to be very resilient or armor plated. Was there armor plating around the helicopter at all? I assume there was up front with in the cockpit for you guys, but what, you know, this is what seems like
what you see is what you get. Nothing. There's nothing there. The helicopter essentially, a 50 caliber round will go through the front to the back of a Huey without stopping.
Nice.
And there are many instances of helicopters coming back with a lot of battle damage, parts of the blade shot off, part of the engine shot off, and it's still running.
She could take a beating.
It's very, very versatile. It's strong helicopter and very combat worthy, let's say. And there was no other armor plate on the aircraft. We had a baffle under the oil cooler, but that was it. The crew also wore chicken plates. We call them chicken plates.
Chicken plates.
Yeah. Well, that's what that armor's called.
What are chicken plates?
We wore a heavy piece of armor on our chests.
Compressed tile.
And then on top of the chicken plate, we would wear a flak vest because rounds could penetrate the flak vest, hit the plate, but the flak vest would keep the fragments from then deflecting into the pilot's face. So it was like a reverse flak vest.
Yeah.
But you have to think about it, that this airplane only weighs about as much as an SUV.
Designed for minimal maintenance, the Huey's engine needs an overhaul after 1,000 flight hours, or approximately every 125,000 miles. That's unprecedented for helicopter service. The turbine engines can be changed in a matter of minutes without draining the fuel or rewiring the electrical system. Fellas, at the nose of the Huey. We were talking earlier in the cockpit about the fact that you guys had the luxury of flying with a maintenance guy in the aircraft at times. Tell me about how the Huey was maintenance-wise on the ground. From what I recall, it was a very reliable workhorse.
It's very reliable. Just like you said, very reliable. It's very easy to work on, very simple. Not a lot of complicated systems on it, not a lot of complicated radar and communication systems and so on and so forth. Just basically an engine or rotor system and a fuselage, and that's it.
A portable hoist system simplifies field repairs even more. The Huey engine, designed to run on a variety of fuels, proves itself in combat when supplies are scarce. You talked about fuel and armament loads. You know, let's say you're fully topped off with fuel and you knew you were going to have to go out and fly a long mission. What kind of sortie duration could you guys normally?
These things would stay in the air for about 2 hours and 15 minutes. At that point, you're either on the ground or looking for some place to find fuel.
As performance reports make their way from Southeast Asia, Bell knows he needs to make the Huey better suited for the escort role. He installs the XM6 Emerson quad system. The co-pilot controls these flex guns through a sight device mounted on top of the cabin. They're fed by a dozen 500-round ammunition boxes mounted on the rear cabin floor. So, Rick, talk to me about what a typical crew was for you guys on a gunship mission. We'll talk about the transport mission maybe later on, but for you guys out there in Vietnam, what was a crew?
Sure. Well, we typically operated with 2 ships working together in a fire team. Sometimes 3, but usually 2. And the aircraft commander would fly in the left seat, and he would in our unit and would fire the miniguns that were mounted to the side of the helicopter. We had 2 XM-21.
Like right on the fuselage.
We had a pylon that extended out here, and the machine guns were mounted on the pylon. They were like a Gatling gun machine gun, and they were slaved to a sight that hung down in front of me, and then wherever I moved the sight, the machine guns would fire.
Oh, so they weren't fixed. They
would move. So whenever I moved the sight, they would move to the left and right. Now we never worked a target by overflying it. We would always brake to the left and right. So if we were braking away from the inboard gun, then the outboard gun would double its rate of fire. So it could put like 4,000 rounds per minute on the target. The co-pilot rode in the right seat and fired the rockets. And then we had ammo cans that were mounted longitudinally in the center of the helicopter, and they would belt feed the machine guns on either side. And then the door gunner and crew chief would have their own machine guns firing from the side. So we were very, very heavily loaded, especially in the hot weather.
A Huey armed with flex guns can fire at targets not directly in its flight path. Despite these improvements, the Huey finds it even harder to slug it out with an entrenched hostile force. More work has to be done. Bell's continual upgrades bring the UH-1D into service in 1963. With the rotor diameter increasing up to 48 feet and a blade chord of 21 inches, these aircraft nearly double the basic Huey payload. The UH-1D can carry up to 14 passengers or 4,000 pounds of freight. More than 1,000 UH-1Ds form the backbone of the Army's battlefield support helicopter force.
There was a mount here, a pintle mount for the door gunners here, and the crew chief and door gunner sat on this side. Now this is a little longer. The D model and the H model are longer than the B and C. The door gunners that we had were right here. And the ammo cans were under there, and whatever systems that we operated. And of course, the rockets are fixed to the skids.
And they would just throw the doors open.
You know, or we take the doors off. Most of the time we flip the doors off. Any kind of weight takes away from ammunition and or fuel that you can carry.
Now, he mentioned a door gunner and a crew chief. Jim, were their roles different?
Yes, essentially, the crew chief is responsible for the aircraft. The door gunner is responsible for the weapon systems. Ours were a little different than his. We had two M60 machine guns on each side, flexible. They're right over here. And in the front, right on the nose of the helicopter, was a turret mounting a 40mm grenade launcher on another system called the Frog. The M16 is just called the M16, different from the rifle, the M16 kit. And then we had another one called the Hog, which had 48 rockets in large rectangular containers here, 24 on each side, plus the two door gunners.
While Hueys proved themselves as gunships, they served equally well as dust-off helicopters for the U.S. Army Medical Corps. Known by their radio call sign Dust-Off, these unarmed Huey ambulances evacuate wounded soldiers within 15 minutes, regardless of service branch or nationality. They stay true to their motto, not without your wounded. The sight and sound of a dust-off Huey reassures injured and stranded soldiers. More than 97% of the wounded picked up in the field survive, a testament to the bravery of the pilots and the success of the Huey. When you guys did the medevac, secondary mission, it's not like you could throw,
No.
put a magnet Red Cross on the side of the Huey. You were still fair game.
Later on in the war, the medevac, the dust-off guys painted over the Red Crosses for obvious reasons, because they were the target.
Yeah.
But the medevac guys did a superb job. Many, many medals of honors were granted for medevac pilots.
As American involvement in Vietnam escalates, the versatile Huey gets pushed into service with all four branches of the American military.
Bluebird 3-0.
Large cargo position X-ray, 7386.
Request surface units investigate.
Bluebird 3-0, this is clean cut, roger out. Suspicious contact report, sir. Very well, thank you.
In late 1965, the United States Navy is called to patrol the 2,500-mile network of canals and streams of the Mekong River Delta. Operation Game Warden tries to stop the flow of enemy supplies into South Vietnam. The maze of Delta waterways is swarming with enemy activity, even in the face of the Navy's deployment of armed patrol boats. Recognizing the need for helicopter gunship support, the Navy borrows several Huey gunships from the Army. The first of them arrive in March 1966. In April 1967, the operations consolidate into the Helicopter Attack Light Squadron 3, nicknamed the Seawolves. Their two-pronged mission provides direct support of armed patrol boats and offers armed patrol of the river delta areas. The Huey's adaptability makes it the essential aircraft. By 1967, the United States is fully engaged in a helicopter war. At any time in the following 4 years, as many as 2,000 of the aircraft darken the skies over Vietnam. Although the Huey thrives in nearly every role it's thrust into, by the summer of 1966, the changing situation requires a new gunship. The war keeps escalating, and the Huey, after all, is really a modified utility helicopter. The time has come for a true helicopter gunship. During the Vietnam War, the Huey proves itself in every area of military service. But there's still room for improvement, and the Huey soars forward into the new age of the helicopter. Debuting in 1968, the Bell Uh1 Huey Cobra is the first helicopter designed specifically as a gunship. Its awesome firepower and tremendous speed heralds the future of attack helicopters. Racing ahead to prepare the chosen location for a landing party, the Cobras fire their weapons in all directions, suppressing the enemy's fire from the ground. The barrage continues during actual landing, but only after another Cobra lays a screen of smoke to provide an extra margin of safety. Once troops land, the Cobra's mission changes to direct fire support. The ground commander, in direct contact with the Cobra fire team leader, announces enemy positions. The Cobra's accurate shooting enables the ground leader to direct fire only meters away from his own position. Each Cobra is armed with over a ton of ordnance, which is shot from two 19-shot rocket pods located on each side of the aircraft. The Cobra has as much firepower as a 38-round howitzer barrage. But the Cobra isn't perfect. It's designed to have air conditioning. Many never have it installed. The enormous plexiglass windshield becomes a greenhouse in the hot, humid jungle, leaving the pilot and co-pilot miserable. And unlike the earlier Hueys, the Cobras can handle only 2 passengers. There are no cargo holds, no benches, no big doors on the sides. So if a Cobra comes across troops who need to be airlifted to safety, it must leave them behind. These problems don't prevent the aircraft from accomplishing the task it's designed for. The Cobra successfully demonstrates the practical use of a gunship in combat. An attack helicopter with a powerful engine, great maneuverability, and awesome firepower becomes the cornerstone of contemporary warfare. Anticipating such developments, Lockheed designs the AH-56 Cheyenne. In 1966, after the Cheyenne wins a U.S. Army Advanced Aerial Fire Support competition, the Army orders 10 aircraft for extensive tests. The Cheyenne uses the Lockheed rigid rotor system and has a pusher rotor on the tail for high-speed level flight. The short stubbed wings provide lift for high forward speed. During forward flight, most of the engine's power drives the rear pusher rotor, with only 25% of the power feeding the main rotor. The Cheyenne can reach an impressive 249 miles per hour, and its ability to fly fast and low is unprecedented for its time. The new tow wire-guided anti-tank missile system forms the heart of the Cheyenne's firepower. The Cheyenne carries 6 tow missiles, a 7.62 millimeter minigun, and a 30 millimeter anti-tank cannon. The computer-assisted flexible weapons system relies on both laser and Doppler radar technology. The weapon system can lock on its target throughout the entire engagement, regardless of the helicopter's position. The tandem seating arrangement with the huge canopy provides superb visibility for the pilot and gunner. The pilot can fire at any target he sees, simply by aiming with his helmet sight, selecting his weapon, and shooting. The rocket system is very accurate, and the aircraft's ability to approach at low altitudes at high speed reduces exposure to enemy fire. Inspired by the continued successes of the Huey and the Cobra, Lockheed diligently tries to move the Cheyenne from development into production. Unfortunately, the high cost forces the project's cancellation in 1972. But the Cheyenne confirms the military's commitment to the attack helicopter, a significant advancement in military strategy that began with the Huey. Bell developed military helicopter models ranging from A all the way to Z. As the Vietnam War grinds to an end, many Americans still wonder about why and how it was fought. Veterans return home from the sheer brutality of the war to find a public bitterly divided about their mission. The healing of the wounds from the war continues to this day. Still flying today, too, from what I hear, like all over the world, right?
Exactly. The Huey finally retired from the U.S. military about a year ago, but it's being flown by armed services all over the world, and it's used by a lot of commercial operators as well as by medevac companies.
For some, the Huey becomes a symbol of healing and a reminder of sacrifice. Vietnam veterans across the country still come together, sharing a bond with fellow veterans living and gone to ensure their sacrifice is not forgotten. We were talking about auto rotation a little bit earlier, and you had to auto rotate for real once, actually in Vietnam. Tell me a little bit about that story.
Yeah, I was flying a VIP for the State Department and had an engine failure in a bad part of the Delta south of Saigon, and did an auto rotation into a rice paddy. Fortunately for me and my passenger, we had a Navy Seawolf helicopter pilot flying an airplane very similar to the gunships that we flew, and he heard my mayday and picked me up within 5 minutes of hitting in. And I had a reunion with him after 40 years. It was a year ago, and found out for the first time that there were Viet Cong with weapons within 150 meters of my position before he picked me up. So it was quite a reunion, as you can imagine.
Oh, I can only imagine. I tell you, flying these helicopters where you guys flew them in the situations you were in, that took nothing shy of unbelievable guts.
Well, you're nice to say that, but when you're actually when you're actually doing it, you don't have the luxury of thinking about that. You're basically doing a job that needs to be done because the guys on the ground need you just like you need them. So we were all part of a team.
In Maryland, a group of Vietnam veterans decides to rescue and restore an old friend.
When I first saw it, I saw a photograph in the newspaper, And I came down to the chapter. I've been a member of Vietnam Veterans at Large, and saw the newspaper, read the article, came down and looked at her. And I'll be honest, Jack, I told you at the beginning, well, do we really want to do this? She's in pretty bad shape. She's been pretty well beat up over the years. Martin's Aviation Museum got her first, got her down to Martin's, and then we got her from Martin Aviation. Brought her here. That photograph of them bringing it into here was what got my interest, got me involved when I met Jack.
Starting at the planning stage, we had to do our homework and getting part numbers and contacting people trying to find parts so we could refit her, and getting in contact with people who could help us out.
We located a lot of parts through the internet. I'm a member of the Vietnam Helicopter Flight Crew Network on the internet. It's a bunch of pilots, co-pilots, crew chiefs, gunners. Let them know what we were doing and asked for their help, basically. Started looking for parts. We got parts from all across the country, as far away as California. Sometimes no more than a phone call, hey, we need this part. Yeah, sure, we'll send it out.
To have so much support across the United States to find parts for this young lady.
Vietnam Veterans of America Chapter 451 spends the better part of a year restoring the old Huey, inside and out. The Huey is now on display outside the Baltimore chapter. The Vietnam conflict has a huge impact on helicopter development and use. The last Hueys are produced in 1976. About 7,000 are used in the Vietnam War. 3,300 of those aircraft are destroyed. 40,000 pilots served during the war. 1,100 are killed. More than 30 years later, most Americans still have trouble sorting out their emotions about the war. Many still search for their own road to reconcile their feelings about Southeast Asia, as more and more Americans remain ignorant of the complexity of the Vietnam era.